Have you ever found yourself caught in an endless loop of justifying your choices to others? Explaining why you took that job, why you ended that relationship, why you're pursuing that dream that no one else seems to understand. What if I told you that one of the greatest minds in psychology believed that this constant need to explain yourself is actually holding you back from becoming who you truly are? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who gave us concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation, had profound insights about why we feel compelled to justify ourselves to others and why we must break free from this pattern. Today, we're diving deep into Jung's philosophy on self-explanation, authenticity, and the courage it takes to live according to your own inner truth. By the end of this video, you'll understand why explaining yourself is often a trap, and how to liberate yourself from the exhausting need for external validation. Jung observed something fundamental about human nature. We are social creatures who constantly measure ourselves against the expectations of others. From the moment we're born, we're shaped by the opinions, judgments, and standards of the people around us, our parents, teachers, friends, and society at large. This isn't inherently bad. As children, we need guidance. We need to learn social norms, develop empathy, and understand how our actions affect others. But somewhere along the way, something shifts. We move from healthy social awareness to something far more destructive: the desperate need for approval. Jung called this phenomenon being possessed by the persona, the mask we wear to meet the expectations of society. The persona is the version of ourselves we present to the world, the carefully curated image designed to gain acceptance, avoid criticism, and fit in. When we constantly explain ourselves, what we're really doing is defending our persona. We're trying to convince others that our mask is acceptable, that we deserve their approval, that our choices align with their values. But here's the profound insight Jung offers. The more we explain ourselves, the more we reinforce our disconnection from our authentic self. What Jung called the self, with a capital S. This authentic self is who we truly are beneath all the layers of social conditioning, beyond all the roles we play, and independent of anyone else's opinion. Think about it. When you feel the urge to explain yourself, what's really happening? You're giving others the power to validate or invalidate your existence. You're essentially saying, I need you to understand and approve of me before I can be okay with my own choices. This creates an exhausting cycle. You make a decision based on your inner truth, but then immediately second-guess it because it doesn't align with someone else's expectations. So you explain, you justify, you build elaborate arguments for why your choice makes sense. And even if they seem to understand, there's always that lingering anxiety. Did they really get it? Do they truly approve? Jung witnessed this pattern repeatedly in his patients. People came to him suffering not from mental illness in the traditional sense, but from what he called a crisis of meaning. They had spent so long living according to other people's scripts that they had lost touch with their own inner guidance system. One of Jung's most powerful observations was this: the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Notice he called it a privilege, not an obligation or a right. It's a privilege because so few people actually claim it. Most people live their entire lives performing for an audience, constantly explaining and justifying, never daring to simply be. Now, let's go deeper into why this habit of over-explaining is so destructive. When Jung developed his theory of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject, deny, or hide, he understood that constant self-explanation is often a shadow behavior. What does this mean? First, over-explaining often stems from deep-seated shame. We explain because we believe that our natural choices, our authentic desires, and our true thoughts are somehow not good enough. We've internalized the message that who we are at our core is unacceptable, so we must dress it up in reasonable explanations. This shame usually originates in childhood. Perhaps you were criticized for being too sensitive, too ambitious, too different. Perhaps your parents, despite loving you, couldn't accept certain aspects of your personality, so you learned to hide those parts and explain away your authentic impulses with more socially acceptable reasoning. Second, chronic explanation is a form of people-pleasing that masks a deeper fear, the terror of rejection and abandonment. Jung understood that humans have an archetypal need for belonging to the tribe. In our evolutionary past, being cast out from the group meant death. This primal fear still lives in our psyche today. When we constantly explain ourselves, we're performing a ritual of appeasement. We're saying, "Please don't reject me. Please don't cast me out. Look, I have good reasons for being who I am." But here's the paradox Jung identified. The more you try to please everyone, the less authentic you become. And the less authentic you become, the emptier you feel. This emptiness then drives you to seek even more validation through explanation, creating a downward spiral. Third, over-explaining prevents individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming a whole, integrated person. Individuation requires that we confront our shadow, integrate our various aspects, and develop our own value system independent of collective opinion. Every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you're choosing conformity over individuation. You're choosing the comfort of approval over the growth that comes from standing alone in your truth. Jung was clear about this. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. When you're secure in who you are, including your flaws and imperfections, you don't need to explain yourself. You can simply be and let others grapple with their own reactions. Consider this scenario. You decide to leave a high-paying corporate job to pursue pottery. Your family thinks you're crazy. Your friends question your judgment. And you feel this overwhelming need to explain, to justify with elaborate arguments about fulfillment, passion, and life being short. But what if you didn't? What if you simply said, "This is what feels right for me," and left it at that? The discomfort you'd feel in that silence is actually the discomfort of authenticity. It's the feeling of standing in your truth without the safety net of others' approval. Jung spent his life exploring the unconscious mind, and he discovered that much of our behavior is driven by forces we're not even aware of. The compulsion to explain ourselves is no exception. At an unconscious level, when we explain ourselves excessively, we're often trying to control how others perceive us. This is an illusion of control. You can't actually control what another person thinks or feels. Their perceptions are filtered through their own unconscious material, their wounds, their fears, their projections. Jung developed the concept of projection to explain this phenomenon. When someone judges you harshly, they're often projecting their own unresolved issues onto you. Your choice to leave that corporate job might trigger their regret about not pursuing their own dreams. Your decision to stay single might activate their fear of being alone. Your unconventional lifestyle might challenge their need for security. No amount of explanation will resolve their projection. In fact, the more you explain, the more you entangle yourself in their psychological drama. You become a character in their story rather than the author of your own. Another unconscious motivation for over-explaining is the avoidance of inner work. It's easier to focus on convincing others than to sit with the uncomfortable question, why do I need their approval so badly? Jung believed that the unconscious is always trying to communicate with us through symptoms, anxiety, depression, compulsive behaviors. The anxiety you feel when you don't explain yourself is actually a message from your unconscious. It's pointing to an unresolved wound, a place where you haven't fully claimed your autonomy. Many of Jung's patients discovered through analysis that their need to explain came from a specific childhood wound, a parent who was hypercritical, a sibling who always got the attention, a formative experience of humiliation or shame. The unconscious keeps replaying these scenarios, trying to get a different outcome. Maybe this time, if I explain it perfectly, they'll finally understand and accept me. But here's what Jung knew. That acceptance you're seeking from others, you can only give it to yourself. No external validation will ever fill the void created by self-rejection. This is why Jung emphasized the importance of making the unconscious conscious. When you become aware of why you feel compelled to explain yourself, you can begin to make different choices. You can catch yourself mid-explanation and ask, who am I really trying to convince right now? Them or myself? So, how do we break free from this pattern? Jung's answer lies in the process he considered his greatest contribution to psychology: individuation. Individuation is the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are. It's not about perfection or achieving some ideal state. It's about integrating all the disparate parts of yourself, your conscious and unconscious, your persona and your shadow, your strengths and weaknesses, into a cohesive, authentic whole. The first step in individuation is recognizing that you are not your persona. You are not the roles you play or the masks you wear. These are adaptive strategies you've developed to navigate the world, but they are not your essence. When you understand this distinction, you can begin to let go of the need to defend your persona. If someone criticizes your choices, they're not actually criticizing you. They're criticizing a role, a behavior, or a decision. Your essential self remains untouched by their opinion. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This is radical responsibility. It means acknowledging that while you can't control others' reactions, you can control whether you give those reactions power over your life. The second step is developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites. In this case, it's the tension between your need for belonging and your need for authenticity. You don't resolve this tension by choosing one over the other. You hold both and allow a third way to emerge. This might look like maintaining relationships while also maintaining boundaries. You can love your family and still make choices they don't understand. You can value your friends' input without requiring their approval. You can be part of society without being enslaved by its expectations. The third step is confronting what Jung called the dark night of the soul, the inevitable loneliness that comes with authenticity. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will misunderstand you. Some will judge you. Some will drift away. This is painful, but it's also necessary. Jung observed that this loneliness is actually a kind of initiation. It burns away false connections and reveals who truly sees you, who truly values you for who you are rather than who they need you to be. The relationships that survive this fire become deeper and more genuine. Here's a crucial insight from Jung. Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. When you stop explaining yourself defensively and instead share authentically with those who have earned the right to hear you, you transform loneliness into solitude, a rich, generative aloneness that actually connects you more deeply to yourself and others. The final step in individuation, as it relates to self-explanation, is developing an internal locus of evaluation. This is a phrase from another psychologist, Carl Jung, but it perfectly captures Jung's philosophy. It means that the primary source of validation and judgment shifts from outside to inside. Instead of asking, "What will they think?" you begin asking, "Does this align with my values? Does this serve my growth? Does this honor my authentic self?" This doesn't mean you become selfish or callous. In fact, Jung found the opposite to be true. When you're not constantly defending yourself, you become more available for genuine connection. When you're not performing for approval, you can offer real presence. When you're not explaining yourself compulsively, Your words carry more weight when you do choose to share. Let's get practical. How do you actually stop explaining yourself in everyday situations? First, practice the pause. When you feel the urge to launch into an explanation, stop. Take a breath. Ask yourself, does this person need this information? Or am I just seeking approval? Often, you'll realize the explanation is unnecessary. Jung emphasized the importance of distinguishing between explanation and communication. Explanation is defensive and seeks approval. Communication is informative and seeks understanding. You might choose to communicate your reasoning to someone you're in a close relationship with, not because you need their approval, but because sharing your thought process builds intimacy and trust. For example, if your partner asks why you're changing careers, the difference sounds like this. Explanation mode. Well, you see, I've been really stressed, and the hours are terrible, and my boss is impossible, and I read this article about following your passion, and I think I might regret it if I don't try, and I know it seems risky, but actually when you calculate the numbers. Communication mode. I've realized this career path doesn't align with my values anymore. I'm choosing to make a change, and I'd love to share more about it if you're interested. Notice the difference. The first is desperate and scattered, seeking validation. The second is grounded and clear, offering connection without requiring approval. Second, develop your capacity to tolerate discomfort. When someone seems disappointed or confused by your choice, and you resist the urge to explain, you'll feel anxiety. That's normal. Sit with it. Breathe through it. This discomfort is actually the feeling of your authentic self emerging from beneath the persona. Jung had a phrase for this: holding the tension. Growth happens not by resolving tension quickly, but by staying present with it long enough for something new to emerge. Third, choose your audience wisely. There are people who have earned the right to hear your story, people who have demonstrated that they can hold your vulnerability without judgment, who are genuinely curious about your inner world. These people deserve your authentic sharing, not your defensive explaining. But there are also people who haven't earned this right. These are the critics, the projectors, the people who are committed to misunderstanding you because it serves their own psychological needs. Jung would say these people need you to be small so they can feel big, need you to be wrong so they can feel right. You don't owe these people anything. Not your time, not your energy, and certainly not your explanations. Fourth, develop your inner witness, what Jung called the observing ego. This is the part of you that can step back and watch your own psychological processes without getting swept up in them. When you're in a conversation and feel the explanation reflex kicking in, your inner witness can notice, there's that old pattern again. There's my wounded inner child seeking approval. This awareness creates choice. You're no longer a puppet of your conditioning. You're a conscious being who can decide how to respond. Fifth, practice radical self-acceptance. Jung believed that we can't be whole until we accept all parts of ourselves, the good, the bad, the ugly. When you truly accept yourself, including your imperfections and your unconventional choices, you stop needing others to accept you. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice. Daily, you might say to yourself, I accept that I made this choice. I accept that some people won't understand. I accept that I'm imperfect and still learning. And I accept that this is enough. There's a spiritual dimension to Jung's teaching on self-explanation that we can't ignore. Jung understood that the deepest purpose of human life is not happiness or success in the conventional sense, but wholeness, what he called the realization of the self. This self, in Jung's framework, is not just your individual personality, but your connection to something greater, what he called the collective unconscious, the archetypal realm, even the divine. When you're constantly explaining yourself to others, you're disconnected from this deeper source of wisdom and guidance. Jung wrote extensively about the importance of listening to the inner voice, what he sometimes called the voice of the self. This inner voice speaks through dreams, intuitions, synchronicities, and gut feelings. It guides you toward your unique path of development. But you can't hear this voice when you're constantly attuned to the frequencies of external opinion. The voice of the self is quiet, subtle, and easily drowned out by the noise of other people's expectations. When you stop explaining yourself, you create inner silence. In this silence, you can finally hear what your own soul is trying to tell you. You can access a deeper knowing about what's right for you, not based on logic or social approval, but based on an inner alignment that Jung believed was the truest compass we have. This is where Jung's philosophy intersects with mysticism and spirituality. Many spiritual traditions teach some version of this same truth, that the divine speaks within us, that we are each on a unique path, that true wisdom comes from within rather than without. Jung saw the parallels between his psychological work and spiritual practice. He believed that the process of individuation was essentially a spiritual journey, the journey of the soul returning to itself, remembering its true nature, and fulfilling its unique destiny. From this perspective, explaining yourself to others isn't just psychologically exhausting, it's spiritually deadening. It cuts you off from your source. It makes you dependent on the external when the real work is internal. Jung encountered this truth in his own life. After his famous split with Freud, he spent years being criticized, misunderstood, and dismissed by the psychiatric establishment. He could have spent his energy explaining himself, defending his theories, seeking approval from his peers. Instead, he turned inward. He embarked on what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a deep, often frightening exploration of his own psyche. From this inner journey came his most profound insights about archetypes, the collective unconscious, and the process of individuation. His willingness to stand alone, to follow his inner guidance, even when it made no sense to others, gave the world a new understanding of the human psyche. If he had been concerned with explaining himself to his critics, we might never have received these gifts. So what's the ultimate message Carl Jung offers us about explaining ourselves? It's this: your life is not a courtroom, and you are not on trial. You don't need to present evidence for your existence. You don't need to justify your choices to a jury of your peers. You are allowed to simply be who you are, to make the choices that feel right to you, and to let others have their own reactions without making those reactions your responsibility. This doesn't mean you become indifferent or callous. It doesn't mean you stop caring about others or considering how your choices affect them. It means you develop the capacity to distinguish between genuine accountability, taking responsibility for your actual impact on others, and false responsibility, which is taking ownership of other people's feelings, judgments, and projections. Jung's vision of psychological maturity involves becoming an individual, not in the sense of being isolated or selfish, but in the sense of being whole, integrated, and self-directed. The individuated person doesn't need constant validation because they have a deep, unshakable connection to their own inner authority. This is scary work. It means giving up the comforting illusion that if you just explain yourself well enough, everyone will understand and approve. It means accepting that some people will judge you, some will misunderstand you, and some will never see who you truly are, and learning to be okay with that. But here's what you gain: freedom, authenticity, the ability to live according to your deepest values, the capacity for genuine connection rather than performative relationships, and ultimately, the privilege of becoming who you truly are. Jung believed that this journey, the journey of individuation, of becoming authentic, of stopping the endless explanations, and simply being, is the most important work any human can do, not just for yourself, but for the collective. Because the world doesn't need more people performing approved roles. It needs people who have done the difficult work of becoming themselves. So I'll leave you with this challenge. Pay attention this week to when you feel the urge to explain yourself. Notice what triggers it. Notice what you're afraid will happen if you don't explain. And then, just once or twice, try simply not explaining. Make your choice, own your decision, and allow others to have whatever reaction they're going to have. It will be uncomfortable. Your conditioning will scream at you, but in that discomfort, you might just discover something precious. The first glimpse of your authentic self, freed from the prison of other people's opinions. As Jung reminds us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But it's also the most liberating. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, you don't have to explain why you chose to do so. For more content on psychology, philosophy, and personal growth, check out these videos. And as always, the journey of becoming yourself is the greatest adventure you'll ever undertake. See you in the next one.